Harlan Voss did it on a Tuesday, not in private, not in a lawyer's office with neutral walls and a box of tissues on the table. He did it in the living room of the house his grandmother had left him, the one with the wide porch and the magnolia tree out front that bloomed every April without fail, the one Serena had painted the front door of herself because she thought the original color was too sad. He did it, while his mother sat in the wingback chair by the window like she was presiding over something. And he did it while the woman he had been seeing for 11 months stood in the kitchen doorway in a silk blouse that still had the crease from the store. Serena Voss, 36 years old, landscape architect, wife of 6 years, stood in the middle of that room and held the envelope he had handed her and did not cry. She wanted to. She felt the pressure of it behind her eyes, the way grief crowds the throat when it has nowhere else to go. But she looked at her mother-in-law's face, the small, satisfied tightening at the corners of her mouth, and she decided not to give her that. She took the envelope, she said, "Okay," and she left. That was the first Tuesday in March. People who knew Serena from before, from her years at the firm, from graduate school, from the neighborhood she had grown up in on the east side of Charlotte, would have told you she was not a loud person. She did not argue in the way that made scenes. She made decisions quietly and then lived inside them, which some people mistook for passivity, and others, the ones who paid attention, understood something else entirely. She had met Harlan Voss at a fundraiser for an urban reforestation nonprofit. He had been charming in the way that men are charming when they are used to rooms turning toward them. Good-looking in a conventional way. Third-generation family in Charlotte, the kind with a name on a building downtown. His grandmother had been a civic figure. His father had sat on 3 boards. Harlan himself ran the day-to-day operations of Voss Development, a mid-sized real estate development company that had been building commercial properties across the Carolinas for 40 years. Serena had her own work. She was a principal at a landscape architecture firm then, leading the design teams on municipal contracts. She liked her work in a way that was hard to explain to people who had never loved a job. The way a plan could exist in her head fully formed before a single line was drawn, the way she could walk a piece of land and already see what it wanted to become. They married 2 years after they met. The wedding was at a botanical garden, which Harlan had teased her about, but which she had insisted on, because she said the setting should mean something. His mother, Nadine Voss, 61 years old, a woman who wore her disapproval the way other women wore jewelry, always present, always polished, had smiled through the entire ceremony and said nothing that wasn't technically kind. The problems, if you were to locate them precisely, began around year 3. Harlan had started working longer hours, or said he was. His mother had begun appearing at the house more often, sometimes when Serena wasn't home. Serena had noticed a shift in the way he spoke to her. Not cruel, not dramatic, but quieter, like he was already rehearsing a different life and she was in the wrong room. She had asked him, once, directly. They had been sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, and she had put her coffee cup down and looked at him and said, "Is something wrong between us?" He had said, "I'm just tired, Serena." She had believed him, or she had wanted to, which is not the same thing but can feel like it for a long time. The woman's name was Tatum Weybridge, 29. She worked in marketing for a commercial property group. She was the kind of person who posted things on social media that were designed to look casual but had clearly been thought about. Serena did not know about her for 7 months. When she found out, it was not from Harlan. It was from a woman at her gym who had seen them together at a restaurant and had assumed, incorrectly, that Serena already knew. She had gone home that afternoon and sat on the stairs inside the front door for a long time before she moved. She did not confront Harlan that night. She did not confront him the next week. She made some decisions instead, quietly, in the way she made all of her decisions. She called her attorney. She met with her financial advisor. She began moving through her own life differently, not with anger exactly, though the anger was there, deep and constant, like a hum in the walls, but with clarity, the kind that comes after something breaks, and you can finally see the shape of what you were living in. She had always kept her professional finances separate from the marital accounts. It was something she had done from the beginning, not out of mistrust, she had told herself at the time, but because it was practical. She ran projects with significant budgets. She needed clean books. Harlan had never objected. He had never asked. Over those 7 months, while Harlan was having dinner with Tatum Weybridge, while his mother was making calls Serena wasn't supposed to know about, Serena had been working on something. 18 months before Harlan handed her that envelope, Serena had left the firm. She had not announced it widely. She had told her closest colleagues, settled her transition responsibilities, and stepped away cleanly. Most people assumed she was taking time off. Some assumed she was going to consult independently. A few of her closer friends knew she was building something, though she had been careful about the details. What she had built over 14 months was a company called Greenline Capital Partners, not a landscape architecture firm, a development holding company, land acquisition, site development, the financial architecture of turning raw property into something viable. She had spent 2 years before leaving the firm quietly learning the parts of the industry she hadn't needed to know as a designer. She had taken on a silent partner, a college friend named Bernard, who had been doing commercial real estate investment in Atlanta for 15 years. She had structured the ownership carefully, with counsel, so that her name appeared where it needed to and nowhere else. Greenline's focus was distressed or underperforming commercial properties in mid-sized southern cities. The kind of assets that had the bones for something better but needed someone who understood both the physical land and the financial position. She was good at it. By the time Harlan handed her the envelope on that Tuesday in March, Greenline Capital Partners had closed 3 acquisitions and was under letter of intent on a 4th. The 4th one was a property portfolio in Charlotte. It had been on the market for 8 months. It was significantly undervalued because of a zoning complication that Serena had identified as resolvable and the previous buyers had not. The portfolio had a name attached to it in the listing documents, Voss Development. Serena moved into a furnished apartment in South End the week after she left the house. She took her clothes, her books, her drafting tools, and the photograph from the botanical garden wedding, not because she wanted to look at it, but because she was not going to leave it there for Nadine to dispose of. She did not call Harlan. She did not answer his mother's emails. She retained her attorney, a woman named Paulette, who had the specific quality of being very calm in rooms where other people were not, and she let Paulette handle the formal communications. She went to work. Voss Development had been struggling for 2 years, though Harlan had not spoken about it in any way that conveyed the actual severity of the situation. Serena had gathered some of this from overheard phone calls, from a document she had seen on his desk once that he had moved quickly, from the general texture of his anxiety in the last year and a half of their marriage. After she left and began doing her own research, the picture came into sharper focus. The company had overextended on 2 commercial projects in the Piedmont region. The financing terms were punishing. The market had shifted. Voss Development owed significantly more than it was currently earning, and the properties they owned, including the flagship commercial portfolio in Charlotte that had been the heart of the company for decades, were being assessed as potential liquidation assets by their primary lender. The lender had been in conversation with several interested buyers. Greenline Capital Partners was one of them. Serena had not engineered this. She had not targeted her husband's company. She had identified a distressed portfolio with genuine investment potential, had done the analysis, had made the case to Bernard, and they had moved forward. It was only when the full property list came through in due diligence that she saw the Voss name on the deed for the Charlotte properties and understood what she was holding. She sat with that for a week. She talked to Bernard. She talked to Paulette. She talked to herself, at length, in the apartment in South End, in the mornings before work when the city was still quiet. Then she decided to continue. The mediation process for the divorce was scheduled for a Thursday in May. Harlan arrived with his attorney, a man named Graves, who had a reputation for being aggressive in a way that sometimes worked and sometimes simply made everyone in the room tired. Nadine was not present, but had sent a letter of support for Harlan's position that Graves had submitted as an exhibit, which Paulette had looked at for a moment before setting it aside without comment. Tatum Weybridge was not there. That was the thing about the other woman in these situations. They were almost never present for the actual cost. They got the dinners and the weekends and the feeling of being chosen. They did not sit in mediation rooms. Harlan looked tired. Serena noticed this and felt something that was not quite sympathy, but not its opposite either. He had aged in the 2 months since March. The confidence that had always given him a kind of physical ease, the way he moved through rooms assuming they would accommodate him, had come loose somehow. He sat across from her and looked at his hands more than he looked at her. The proceeding was not especially dramatic. Paulette was thorough and exact. She documented the marital assets, the timeline of the marriage, the contributions Serena had made to the household in years when Harlan's income from Voss Development had been inconsistent. Graves made arguments. Paulette responded to the arguments. Serena answered questions when asked and was otherwise still. At one point, Graves said something about Serena having left her career without pursuing income, the implication being that she had been financially dependent and was now making claims accordingly. Paulette said, "My client's current professional activities are not part of the marital estate and are therefore not subject to this proceeding." If Mr. Voss's counsel would like to revisit the division of the marital assets as documented, we can do that. Graves said he would like to do that. They did that. Harlan at one point looked at Serena across the table and said, I just want you to know that none of this was meant to hurt you. Serena looked back at him. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, I know you believe that. The acquisition closed on a Friday in June. The process had taken 4 months from the initial offer to final closing, which was relatively fast, and had required significant coordination between Greenline's legal team, the lender, and the various parties involved in the Voss development debt structure. Bernard had flown in from Atlanta for the final week. Serena had been in the offices of the title company so often over the preceding 2 weeks that the receptionist knew her coffee order. The signing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Serena arrived at 9:45. She wore a grey blazer she had bought the previous fall, before everything, the kind of thing she had always kept for meetings, where the other side needed to understand who they were sitting across from. She did not expect Harlan to be there. The deal had been structured so that Voss Development's principals were not required to be present at closing. They had already signed what they needed to sign, already accepted the terms. The whole thing had been processed at arm's length through the lender and counsel. Serena had assumed that Harlan, even if he knew the buyer's name by now, would not come. She had assumed incorrectly. He was standing in the lobby of the title company when she walked in. He was alone. No Graves, no Tatum, not even his mother, which somehow registered as the most telling detail. He was wearing a suit that he had always worn when he wanted to feel like himself, and he was standing with his hands in his pockets, and when he saw her, went very still. They looked at each other for a moment. He said, Tell me this isn't real. Serena shifted the folder she was carrying to her other hand. Which part? All of it. His voice was not angry. She had maybe expected anger. He just sounded like a man standing in the rubble of something he had not understood was being built while he was looking somewhere else. How long? The company has been operating for 14 months, she said. I started planning before that, he exhaled slowly. You knew. In March, when I gave you the papers, you already knew. I knew about Tatum before March, Serena said. She kept her voice even. I had been making arrangements for a while, and you didn't say anything. You didn't ask what I was working on, she said. You haven't asked in years. That landed somewhere. She watched it land. He put one hand over his mouth briefly, the way people do when they are trying to hold something in. What happens to the properties? He asked finally. To the Voss name on the buildings, the lender is satisfied, the debt is cleared, and the portfolio transfers to Greenline. What happens to the buildings after that is a function of the development plan. She paused. They're good buildings. They'll be fine, but they won't be ours. Serena looked at him for a moment. Harlan, she said. They stopped being ours in March. She walked past him toward the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped in. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was him standing in the lobby with his hands at his sides, looking at the floor, in the building that had, as of that morning, belonged to someone else. There was a moment, about 3 weeks after the closing, that Serena thought about more than she expected to. She had been in a meeting with a property manager from the Charlotte portfolio, going over tenant communication protocols for the transition. The meeting was routine. At the end of it, the property manager, a practical woman in her 50s who had been working with the Voss properties for 12 years, had leaned back in her chair and looked at Serena with an expression of mild curiosity. Were you surprised, she asked, that it ended up being their portfolio? Serena considered the question. I was surprised when I saw the name in due diligence, she said. After that, no. Were you going to back out? No, the woman nodded slowly. He know you were doing this kind of work? Serena thought about the years of Sunday mornings when Harlan had asked how her day was and what she said to that. She thought about the dinner parties where he had introduced her as his wife, just his wife, as though the years of her professional life were decorative. She thought about the way he had handed her that envelope, quickly, like removing a splinter, while his mother watched and said nothing, and Tatum Weybridge stood in the kitchen doorway. No, Serena said, he didn't. The property manager was quiet for a moment, then she said, well, he does now. Nadine Voss called Serena's cell phone on a Saturday morning in July. Serena did not answer. She listened to the voicemail later while she was making coffee, standing at the window in the South End apartment, looking at the street below. Nadine's voice on the message was different from the voice Serena had known for 6 years, the measured, curated voice of a woman who considered every sentence before releasing it. This voice was tighter. It had lost some of its architecture. She said that Serena had always been cold, that she had never truly been part of the family, that what she had done to Harlan's company was a betrayal, that there were legal questions worth exploring, that she hoped Serena was proud of herself. Serena listened to all of it. Then she set the phone face down on the counter and poured her coffee and stood for a moment in the quiet of her apartment. Paulette had already told her there were no legal questions worth exploring. The acquisition had been clean, at arm's length, properly structured. Serena had not targeted the company, had not manipulated the process, had not done anything other than run a business well and let an opportunity develop into what it was. She did not call Nadine back. She did send one text message to Harlan later that day. It said, "The tenant transition documentation is being handled by Green Line's property management team. Your former tenants are in good hands." He did not respond. Bernard flew in again in August. They had a dinner to celebrate the first completed renovation on one of the Charlotte properties, a commercial building on a corner lot that had been functionally vacant for 2 years and would now house 3 small businesses by October. It was not a large event, just the 2 of them and a few members of the team at a restaurant Serena liked in Noda, with a bottle of wine that was better than what they usually had at working dinners. At the end of the evening, after the others had gone, Bernard poured the last of the wine and looked at her across the table and said, "You okay?" Serena thought about the question honestly, the way she tried to think about most things. "Yeah," she said. "I think I am the Harlan thing, is what it is." She turned the wineglass by the stem. "I spent a long time trying to be what that family wanted me to be, and I kept working the whole time, and it still didn't matter to them so." She shrugged a little. "At least now what I built is mine." Bernard nodded. He had known her for 20 years. He did not try to add anything to that. Outside, the city was warm and moving, the way southern cities are in August, full of noise and heat, and the particular energy of a summer night that has not cooled down yet. Serena paid the check, which she insisted on, and Bernard had stopped arguing about after the second deal closed. They walked out into the evening. She had a drive-through of 3 properties on the calendar for Monday morning. The zoning resolution she had identified in the original Charlotte portfolio was working its way through the city process and was expected to clear by September. There were 2 new site packages on her desk that she hadn't had time to assess yet. She was not thinking about Harlan Voss or his mother, or Tatum Weybridge and the crease in her silk blouse. She was thinking about what she was going to do next. That was in the end how she had always been. Quiet, working, waiting for the right moment, not because she was patient in some abstract virtue-signaling way, but because she had learned, across 36 years of watching how things actually worked, that the people who move carefully and understand what they're building before they build it tend to end up with something that lasts. The house with the magnolia tree was on the market by September. She saw the listing by accident on a real estate app she used for work. The door was still the color she had painted it. She thought about that for a moment. Then she closed the app and went back to work.